Very warm welcome to you from wherever you are around the world. My name is Mark Williamson, and thank you for joining us for another live Action for Happiness event. It's fantastic to be together again as a community, and I'm really glad to be joined this evening by Meera Phull, who's our guest. Meera, it's lovely to have you with us.
Hi, it's lovely to be here.
And as everyone will know, hopefully, the theme of our event this evening is Shift Your Mindset. And I'm really excited that Meera is going to be sharing with us some of her expertise, particularly with a CBT, kind of cognitive behavioral therapy lens on how we can look after our own mental health and also share those ideas more widely. If it's your first time at one of these events, thank you for being here. This is a huge global community of people trying to take action to create a happier and kinder world together, and you're very welcome. Please do engage in the chat, as I see many of you are doing already, and there'll be a chance to ask questions to Meera, so please do use the Q&A and put your question up so we can come back to those a bit later in the event. And for anyone who's a regular, thanks for being here again. It's wonderful to have so many of you involved in the Action for Happiness community, not just in these events, but also using our resources like our monthly action calendars, getting involved as volunteers, running local groups, spreading these ideas more widely. Meera, let's get straight into this amazingly important topic. And I wondered if we could start with a little bit about you. Obviously, people have come here knowing what this theme is and seeing a bit about your background, but maybe you could share a bit about both your own sort of professional experience, but also what's made you interested in this topic.
Yeah, sure. So I'm a CBT therapist, as you've just shared, Mark, with a background in mental health nursing. So mental health is what I do. It's absolutely my passion. I don't know what else I would do if I wasn't doing this. I absolutely love it, which makes every day in working life an absolute joy. So I feel really, really lucky to be able to say that. And I suppose thinking about how this came about, it certainly wasn't an easy journey or a straightforward journey or a direct journey. It was quite a long-winded path that I took that came from studying psychology. I think I probably discovered psychology a little bit earlier than starting my psychology A-level and found it absolutely fascinating. I'm an avid reader, so loving your bookshelf, Mark. And in reading around lots of things to do with psychology and mental health, came across CBT, which wasn't that well known back then. It was a little while ago. And the concept of being able to change the way you feel by changing the way you think and behave just absolutely fascinated me. And I just decided kind of in my late teens, that is what I want to do. And that is what I did, like I said, in quite a long-winded way with a lot of studying. But that's a little bit about my journey to becoming a CBT therapist.
Thank you, Meera. It's lovely to get to know a bit more about you, but it feels to me this topic is perennially important. We all have mental health to a greater or lesser extent, and we're all dealing with thoughts and feelings constantly. That's part of what it is to be alive, I guess. But it also feels that right now, this is an area that many of us need more support with and actually are struggling with difficult feelings, difficult thoughts, difficult situations in our lives. So I hope that what we're going to talk about together here will be beneficial to many people here, but also ideas that we would both love to see spread more widely across society. I personally feel that the ideas you teach in CBT should be life skills that every child learns in school, that every human has access to. But I wanted to start with something you said to me when we first met about this idea. I think you called it normalizing. Do you want to say a bit about what that means?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think fully agreeing with what you're saying. I think CBT is it's a set of skills that I strongly think we should all be taught and develop at a young age, because it's really good armor for some of life's messiness. But this sense of normalizing is something I think is really important, because the thing that unites us as humans is we all have emotions. We all have these feelings that can be really intense, and sometimes they go a little bit wonky and we're not quite sure what to do with them and how to manage or regulate them. And we don't often talk about it when that happens. We're getting better, So I think there's something really important about normalizing. We're all people, we have emotions, and sometimes we don't really know what to do with them, or we don't like them and it feels really uncomfortable. But if we can learn some skills to notice, well, what triggers them, what brings them on, what then unintentionally keeps them going, we can become really empowered to take action ourselves, really proactively, to make shifts that are more aligned to the way we want to be feeling and living our lives.
Thank you. And I'm looking forward to sharing some of your ways that we can respond perhaps more wisely to difficult thoughts and feelings. But why don't we do what you just said to start with, noticing? And maybe I'll invite the audience to sort of, using what you've just inspired us to do, just take a moment just to notice how you are feeling wherever you are in the world right now. You know, notice some of the thoughts, notice some of the emotional feelings, you know, without a sense of judgment, but just recognizing that this is what it is to be human. And maybe if you'd like to, you could just take a moment to share a few words about how you're feeling or what's on your mind right now, just so we can get a sense of where everyone's at today. So I'll just read a few of these out in case you're not able to see them wherever you are. So I feel satisfied, optimistic, overwhelmed, tense, conflicted, exhausted, positive, angry, tired, just had dinner, so full, grateful, fatigued, worried, exhausted, anxious, confused, calm, knackered, positive, fulfilled, curious, stressed, scared, sad. Wow, what an amazing sort of roller coaster of real experiences there. How are you feeling as you sort of see that live stream of thoughts and feelings?
It's amazing. It's amazing to see the range of emotions we all have. And actually, it's quite a skill to be able to notice and name our emotions.
Yeah.
Because schooling might have changed since I was back at primary school, but it's not something we're really formally taught. It's something that we're almost expected just to navigate. That's quite tricky. So it's quite, from a CBT therapist's point of view, it's quite impressive to see such a broad range of emotions. And also to see, prior to all the emotions being named, a lot of thoughts about your bookshelf.
Yes, always generates lots of discussion. I can't take any credit for it personally. I think I saw Clifford saying, I would love to see it mixed up just to see if it's back in order next time. So thank you for that. Well, I would love to hear you perhaps explain in simple terms what cognitive behavioral therapy involves. I think I've got an idea of it, having worked with those ideas for many years, but it'd be nice to share that. But I guess just one thing, building on what you've just said, maybe it's helpful to remind ourselves that although we might label our emotions as being helpful or unhelpful, even those painful ones have a kind of valid message. So when we feel fear, it's perhaps because there's a danger. When we feel sad, it's perhaps because we've lost something. When we feel angry, it's perhaps because we've been wronged in some way. And these are not things that we should be pushed away, but they're messages to us. And in fact, that noticing that you recognize there in itself is helping us have more input into what we then decide to do. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's such an important point, that we really easily fall into this trap almost of labeling emotions as positive or negative, good and bad. There aren't really good and bad emotions. All of our emotions have a function. They're all there for a reason. But one of the things that's a little bit tricky now is our ability to think. Means the way we think can generate emotions that are maybe disproportionate to the reaction from an evolutionary point of view we were supposed to have to them. So fear absolutely is a really important, it's a really unpleasant emotion. To feel afraid, to feel scared, anxious is not pleasant. I don't think many people enjoy feeling that way. But it serves to protect us. It, like you said, it tells us there's danger, you need to do something. It's a motivating, active emotion. But in modern life, that primal part of our brain hasn't really updated, which means that fear or anxiety response can be activated by something we're thinking about. So even by thinking or imagining something that feels scary or threatening, we can bring on those emotions and associated physical symptoms. So it's super important that we're aware of the way we think and how that affects the way we feel.
But you just reminded me of how thoughts can trigger a physiological response. I was at an event not that long ago, and I suddenly felt the desire to ask a question. And while I was formulating my question to ask the speaker with the public audience, I suddenly felt like my heart rate had gone up, and I was a bit sweaty and clammy, and I was a bit sort of because I knew I might put my hand up and speak in front of this audience. And it was like, wow, all of those changes in my body are triggered by the thought that I might ask about. I haven't done anything yet. And it was just entirely sort of constructed by a thought in my head. And I found that amazing.
Yeah, it is fascinating, isn't it? And I think sometimes people think, as a CBT therapist or a mental health professional, that, we're immune from this. Absolutely not. Seeing all these hello messages popping up from all over the world, amazing. But there is that response. Definitely my heart started going up. It comes down very quickly as well, which is nice. But it's a really automatic response. And again, there's that bit about normalizing. We're all humans. We all have those feelings and responses. So
well, we talk about mindset in the title of this event, and I'd like to come on to that, but why don't we just start by what do you think of when you think about the skills and tools in your CBT type toolbox? What does that really mean, and what are some of the ways we can think about this relationship between thoughts and emotions?
So CBT is all about, so it's cognitive behavioral therapy. So you're looking at our cognitive processes, so our thoughts and our thinking patterns, and then our behaviors and our actions. So CBT is based on this assumption that we can't necessarily control or change the things that happen to us, or the things that we're experiencing or going through all of the time, but we can learn how to choose the way we respond to them. So if we think about that in a kind of mundane day-to-day example, maybe less day-to-day now, there's more home working, but if we imagine being stuck in a traffic jam on our way to, say, an important work meeting, we might find there are 3 people queued up together in this traffic jam. The situation itself is shared. So everybody is united in being stuck in this traffic jam. The person at the front of the queue might be thinking about this meeting and thinking, oh my goodness, I'm going to be late. I'm going to walk in and everyone's going to stare at me and they're going to judge me. They're going to think I'm so disorganized and my boss is going to think I'm rubbish. Those thoughts are going to generate an emotional response. So this person is probably going to feel quite stressed and anxious. That creates a physical response. So this person might then notice an increase in their heart rate. They might feel a little bit hot, clammy, sweaty, a bit tense. And their behavior then might be a physical action to maybe check the time and kind of monitor how late they are. Or it might be a kind of internal behavior, like rehearsing what to say or kind of thinking of an excuse to come up with for being late. The person in the car behind might be in the car, same traffic jam, but maybe listening to a podcast that they love. And so their thoughts are really aligned to what they're listening to. So their emotional response might be more neutral, or it might be enjoyment or interest. Physically, that's not necessarily going to bring on such noticeable or distressing emotions, and their behavior may be to stay engaged in listening to what they're listening to. A person behind this person in the car might be thinking, this always happens to me, this is so unfair, roadworks are so annoying, why is there another temporary traffic light here, for example? And those kinds of thoughts are likely to bring on feelings of anger, annoyance, frustration, irritation. Some of those physical symptoms can feel quite similar to stress and anxiety. So again, you might notice that increased heart rate, that kind of hot temperature, that clamminess, that tension. Their behavior might be to start road raging in the car or honking the horn or other things. So I guess to give an overview of CBT, what we're looking at is those 3 people can't necessarily change the fact that they're stuck in a traffic jam in that moment, but they're having 3 very different experiences of it. So if we can learn to understand how we respond in a situation in terms of the way we think and behave, we can change the way that we feel, both physically and emotionally.
I love that analogy, because you're reminding us that it's exactly the same situation, and yet these are completely different, not just thoughts, but feelings and physiological responses, and then actions. You might drive differently, or shout at other people and put other people at danger, for example, all based on that whatever loop you've gone down. I remember when I first discovered CBT, one of the things I used to say to myself was along the lines of, I think I was on quite a stressful project, and I said, like, oh, he makes me so angry, and CBT helped me realize that actually what I meant was, my interpretation of what that person has done has made me really angry. Now, that might be the completely appropriate response, but I do have an element of choice. And I think what your example shows so beautifully is we're not so much at the mercy of our thoughts as we think we are. There might be a little bit of choice that we have in how we interpret things. So is that would you say that's the core idea with CBT, that you can't change what's going on, but you can have a little bit of choice about how you respond?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, to add to that, I think sometimes it can sound so simplistic. If it was this simple, well, we would all be doing it all the time, every day. It's not always that straightforward. That's why CBT exists. That's why there are therapists and people like me, because we know it's hard, it's a skill set. And I think what's important also to acknowledge is the way we think it's influenced by all of our life experiences. The way we make sense of the world starts at a really young age. So the thoughts that we have in that traffic jam won't necessarily just be about that traffic jam, but all of our previous experiences and our beliefs about our emotions and our rules around timekeeping or being late or the council's role in looking after the roads or whatever it might be. So there's always a backstory behind that. So in CBT, it's absolutely around kind of understanding our thoughts and our behaviors and looking to change them. But we also want to acknowledge, where have they come from? Again, avoiding that labeling of kind of bad and good thoughts. It's acknowledging, well, they are your thoughts. They come from a place. But if we can understand that and look at the function of them, we can gently start to change our thinking and behaving styles to something that's more helpful for us.
I like that word gently, because it implies, that this is a journey and it's a way that we can shift the behavior. Because as you say, if we've had habits that have been laid down for many years, we're not going to suddenly be a different person overnight. But I think you sometimes talk about challenging thoughts, or at least sort of asking, is there evidence to back them up? Could you maybe explain what that means? Because that's quite a complicated idea to get your head around, I think.
Yes, absolutely. So thought challenging is really core in CBT. It's one of my favorite things to do, where we're looking at, okay, well, I'm holding this thought right now, but what's it based on? So we might have a belief about something that might not be true. So I or somebody might go to say a social event, and they might walk into the room and find no one really pays them that much attention, or people seem quite cliquey, and somebody might have a thought of, well, nobody cares that I'm here. People aren't really bothered by me. People don't tend to like me. I think most of us can relate to self-critical thoughts. We all have them sometimes. So in CBT, we look to understand, okay, well, that's what you were thinking in this situation. Is it really true? Is there any evidence behind that belief? So if someone is telling themselves that they're not liked because of that interaction and because of that experience, well, what we want to do is that really kind of gentle curiosity around, okay, well, this is what you think and believe. We don't want to tell someone what they think and believe is wrong, because that's not very helpful. What we want to do is kind of look at, well, what's this based on? Is there any evidence from your life that tells you that that is factually correct? So we might look at the fact that this person probably has some friends, probably has family who, like to spend time with them. Maybe they have a hobby and they've got, people they connect with in other kind of areas of their life. So what we want to do is start to look at evidence that gently challenges that belief. So it might be true that in that situation, people didn't rush over and say hello, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're not liked. So we're starting to bring in a bit of balancing to look at, well, yes, we can see why you might feel that way in this situation, but is there another way of looking at it? And is there any evidence that you can draw on from your own life and experience that tells us maybe that's not completely true?
So let me just make sure I've understood this. So let's say I'm experiencing a feeling like, oh, this person is ignoring me, or a difficult thought that I'm finding challenging. I can then say, well, do I have any evidence to back that up? Like, or is there an alternative explanation? I guess maybe as I walked past them on the street, they were so busy thinking about something else, they didn't see me, for example. So is that part of the skill set here, that you're sort of trying to see that it may not be the way it appears at first glance?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And I think anyone who's ever been in an argument will know that you can be kind of saying one thing that is interpreted in a different way, and
Yeah.
vice versa. That sense of kind of really locking heads where you're just not hearing or getting each other. It's a really similar thing. You can be saying one thing, it can be interpreted in a different way, and vice versa. So it is that sense of, is there another way of looking at this? Is there another explanation that we're maybe missing? Because again, we interpret things with our own filters based on our own previous experiences, which is normal. We have a kind of a filing system in our mind, if you like, that helps us make sense of things based on other things that we've gone through. But in having that fixed or set way of thinking, we sometimes miss other ways of seeing or interpreting a situation that may be more helpful for us.
And Meera, you've obviously worked with lots of different clients dealing with different kinds of thoughts and emotions and difficult experiences. Would you say that it's quite a common thing you see, that somebody comes in kind of convinced about a difficult thought or emotion, but actually with a bit of exploration, they might discover that it, there's a way of reframing it, shifting that the way it seems? Is it quite common that we can unpick that sort of thought pattern?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And this is what I absolutely love about the work I do. I get to see this in action live every working day. That's a real core of CBT, and absolutely we can make those shifts. And sometimes it can take longer for some people than other. Within CBT, we refer to it as brief therapy, and that it doesn't tend to go on for years. You're kind of normally averaging somewhere between 6 and 20 sessions, but absolutely people can turn their lives around in that fairly short space of time in the grand scheme of things, by understanding the influence and the power that the way we think and behave has on the way we feel, and so therefore our mental health and well-being as well.
Well, that's really inspiring and great to hear. And of course, that's one of the reasons I wanted to speak to you. But I guess sometimes we might be in a situation where we challenge our thought or our feeling, and we look at it and say, actually, it is true. I have got a health diagnosis, which is quite frightening. I have had a breakdown in a relationship with a loved one. It's the reality. I can't think about that differently, for example. What do we do next? Is there somewhere else we can go? Let's say we've looked at the thought and it really is a difficult feeling and understandable. Are there still some ways we can respond more wisely?
Yes, absolutely. I think that's such a good point, because again, the work we do in CBT, and when we're looking at thoughts and behaviors, it's got to be grounded in real life. We're not just looking to pluck a happy thought out of thin air and then say, let's think this instead. It's got to be based in reality and our genuine experiences. And sometimes those experiences are really difficult. They're the things we would never want to go through, and we'd never wish on anybody else. So in those situations, again, it's nodding to, right, well, this is true. This situation is true. You are feeling or experiencing this. What's the meaning behind it? So we then go a little layer deeper and think, okay, well, if the thought that's causing distress is, I have a really serious medical condition, well, we can't think our way out of that being true, but we can look at, well, what's the concern about that? And that might seem like a really odd question, because again, that's not something anyone wants to go through, but the concern or the meaning attached to that will be slightly different and nuanced for each of us. So for somebody, there may be a concern about, well, I'll lose my independence, or I'll be a burden on my family, for example. So then we'd look at that thought or belief and think, well, okay, this is what you're thinking. We can understand why you're thinking that way, but is there another way of thinking about it, or can we problem solve it? So if you're concerned about losing your independence, well, where can we find ways you can maintain your independence? Or if you're concerned about the impact that will have on your family, how might we get your family involved so that we can be really collaborative here in getting through this situation? So I think where the thought is kind of accurate, we can either look at the meaning to challenge that, or we can kind of get our problem solving hats on and think, well, okay, this is a really tough situation. What can we do to try and make it feel more manageable?
Thank you. And I just noticed in the chat, Meera, that a few people have just maybe joined us a little bit later and been asking, as a reminder, what is CBT? So for anyone who missed the beginning, we're talking about some of the skills in the cognitive behavioral therapy toolbox. But what we'll do is we'll send an email around tomorrow with links to some resources that Meera has got around what that means, and also ways in which you can put some of this into practice. I want to come on to some more of the practical things we might do, like little habits we can cultivate. We're all about action for happiness, as you know, so we might talk a bit about sort of self-compassion and gratitude and so on. But the title of this event is about mindset, and we haven't really talked about what we mean by that. So I mean, you've been hinting at how we might be able to shift how we think and feel. What do you think you mean by the word mindset and the control we have over it?
That's a really good question. So mindset to me is our overarching outlook. So it's the way we make sense of things in our mind. It's the way we think about things. Now we can have I guess also our mindset can be fluid. It can shift. When we look at mindset, it's understanding, well, what are our thinking patterns? How do we tend to think about things? And essentially, is it helpful for us? Is it working for us? If so, well, that's great. But if it's not, then can we take actions to try and change it so that it is more helpful for us and we feel the way we want to feel?
And I like that sort of step you went through. First of all, noticing what you're feeling. Secondly, kind of understanding the thought behind it. Then saying, well, is that thought accurate? And then saying, well, if it is, can I problem solve? I think that's a really helpful step-by-step way of dealing with pretty much any situation. But I think you've also got some other little practices that you find helpful with your clients. I wondered if you could share one or two little practical things that people could do when they're dealing with difficult thoughts and feelings.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've noticed I'm not a good multitasker, so I'm trying not to pay too much attention to the chat function, but I can see a few things that have caught my eye. And there've been a couple of comments about things like mindfulness as well. So just a nod to that. If we're looking to change something, then we have to become aware of it. So that practice of self-awareness is really key. Mindfulness is all around being present, being here and now, and noticing what's happening, trying not to be judgmental, but being aware and noticing it. So if we're looking to change the way we're thinking, if we're looking to shift our mindset, then absolutely paying attention to that is going to be really key. We can also think about some of those kind of that negative bias that we have to notice negative things more frequently than positive things. So one of the things that we can do to manage that is notice our thoughts, pay attention to where our mind goes, how we think in response to things, so that we can start to notice that balance as well. Do we tend to have a kind of a negative outlook on things, if you like? Do we tend to see the worst in people or things or situations? Or do we tend to be slightly more optimistic and look at the more positive explanations? So one of the things I love to do is what we call a positive log, quite similar to practicing gratitude, slightly different, where you consciously take time each day to think about what's been positive about today. And that can be slightly nuanced and different depending on what you're looking to gain from it. So if you've got that belief, you're that person who walked into that social event and thought nobody likes me, you might actively look for evidence each day that backs up a more helpful belief that I am liked. So you might think about what are the positives from today that back up this more helpful and accurate belief. Or it might be a broader, what are 3 things today that I feel good about? So we can be flexible and creative with it, but paying attention to some of the things that are going well for us can really help us offset and balance some of those more negative critical thoughts that tend to pop up a lot.
Well, I'm a huge fan of this, Meera, and I did it in different ways almost every day if I can, and it has changed my life in rather unexpected ways. Why don't we just do it right now? So if you'd like to get involved, folks, however you're feeling right now, whatever kind of difficult thoughts that are going on, if you'd just like to share in 1 or 2 words something that it would be in your positive log today, if you like, something you feel grateful for, something that you can bring your mind to that is a helpful or pleasing thing rather than a challenging one. So I'll just read a few of these out. My kids, I'm good at my job, this event, nice students, my dog, my husband's company, clear skies, pets, nature, yoga, team, being employed, my sister, good food, dancing, fresh air, parents, snails, my partner, support, talking to someone, watching a film, being kind, contentment. Wow, what a lovely list. That's given me a real boost seeing that, and they're still coming. Thank you, everyone. That's a nice example of what you've just been saying, Meera, I think.
Yeah, and it's lovely to see as well. I think you and I, we've both got a big smile on our face. It feels really nice to take time to think about this. And it's also nice to share that as well and have that social connection. Again, that sense of being united, and we all have things that can make us feel good when we pay attention to them.
Meera, one of the things that I have struggled with, and I know others talk to me about it a lot as well, is that we can often talk rather unkindly to ourselves. And we've had some wonderful people in these events like Kristen Neff and Chris Johnson and so on. But I wonder if you see this a lot with the patients and people that you work with around what you might call a kind of harsh inner voice. And if so, how can we learn to speak a bit more kindly to ourselves?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we are our own worst critics. We are often so much harder on ourselves than we would be on anybody else. And we talk to ourselves in a way we often wouldn't talk to other people. So one of the things that I like to do with this is trying to take a step outside of ourselves. So if we're being really hard on ourselves, let's take getting words jumbled up as an example. I've probably done that at some point today because it's part of being human. But if I was being really hypercritical about it, I might notice that and then think, oh my goodness, I'm such an idiot. I look so stupid now on this talk that's going to go on the internet and there's nothing I can do about it and everyone's going to think I'm rubbish. And be really, really critical and hard on myself. So I think we can probably all relate to that. It becomes problematic if actually that's your predominant way of thinking and it comes up a lot. Now and again, it's kind of normal, but if it's coming up a lot and leaving you feeling really down and insecure about yourself, then we definitely want to tap into that. So one of the things that we can do is try and step out of ourselves and think, well, would I talk to anyone else like that? Now, if my best friend said to me what I've just said to myself, what would I say back to them? So trying to reframe it and thinking, well, yeah, you got your words mixed up. So what? You're a human. We all do that. Nobody cares. Nobody would have noticed. Let it go. Move on. Pay attention to what you're doing now. So trying to kind of think about how would you talk to someone else you really care about, and then seeing if we can apply that to ourselves. I've just seen a comment come up to say that self-love is so tough. It can feel really tough. And again, that's where that backstory comes in. I know that it's not as simple as just do this thing and you'll feel better. It does take time and practice. It is a skill. And sometimes we have to work quite hard to unpick those thinking habits and update them. So absolutely not trying to make out that this is super easy and a quick fix. It takes a lot of time and effort and practice, but it is absolutely life-changing when we do learn these skills.
And I couldn't resist, given what you've just said, the opportunity to remind people that we're in our month that we call Self-Care September as part of our Action for Happiness campaigns at the moment. These calendars that our team create have been used by some 40 million people now, which is rather remarkable. And I guess we're using this September month to encourage a bit more of what you've just said, Meera, really, which is being able to take time to care for ourselves as well as others, not in a sort of narcissistic, I'm the best, I'm amazing kind of way, but in a sense that actually, if we don't speak to ourselves like a good friend, we're not going to be our best selves. And then you can't pour from an empty cup. So when you just get the basics of kindness to yourself right, you're better able to be a good parent and a good friend and a good colleague and so on. So if you're not already familiar with that, please, you can go to the Action for Happiness website and find and share the calendar this month and indeed in future months. In a moment, I'm going to come to questions. So if you've got a question for Meera, please do use the Q&A function and we'll get to at least some of those. And if you see a question you like, please give it a thumbs up and we'll come to the questions that are getting the most voted on to try and address the most popular ones. But just one last one for me before we go to the Q&A, Meera. Lots of people in this community with Action for Happiness are not just interested in caring for themselves. A really strong vibe here is how do we create a happier and kinder world for others too? And so many people here will also know loved ones, friends, colleagues that are dealing with really difficult thoughts and emotions. Maybe they're, in very difficult situations, or maybe they're just in a mindset, to use that word, that isn't the most helpful for them right now. I personally can find it incredibly difficult when I'm with someone and I can see that they're really struggling, but I feel a bit powerless to know how to be with them and how to respond to that. I wondered if you had any thoughts on how we can bring this wisdom into the way that we relate to other people.
Yes. So I think it's everything you're raising is so relatable. I'm sure all of us here have been in a really similar situation where, we're trying to support someone we care about and we don't always know exactly what to say. And I think actually that's what's key. So we don't always know what to say. And maybe that's where we're missing something. So what I would really recommend is focus more on the listening. That ability to actively listen to somebody is so powerful, because actually, again, if we go back to what I mentioned at the start of this conversation, that our ability to think is sometimes problematic in ourselves. So when we are speaking, quite often, and it might be interesting just to pay attention to this the next time you're kind of in a one-to-one conversation or in a group setting. Often when we're talking to we're in conversation with someone, whilst the other person is speaking, we're sort of half there, but we're also sort of half thinking about what we're going to say, like how can I answer the question, or what can I say that's funny, or what's going to impress someone, or what do they need from me, how can I fix this problem. And in doing that, we don't fully necessarily hear the other person. And I think one of the most valuable gifts that we can give is time and attention. And sometimes the less we say or do by stepping back to really listen and be present can be much more powerful than trying to firefight and problem solve and say things to help someone feel better. So that slowing it down, stepping back, and really, really giving your full attention and time to listen, I think is really underestimated.
Thank you. Well said, Meera. I find that really hard sometimes myself. It took me a long time to learn that people don't want to be fixed so much as they would like their problems to be acknowledged and to feel heard. And so when I shifted my mindset from like, oh, I can fix that for you, to like, I hear you, that sounds as it sounds, and just to reflect back, it was really life-changing in terms of the depth of connection and how much then people were able to share and how much I felt I could help them. Thank you. Let's come on to questions. So Lee has said, I suffer from social anxiety. I was wondering if you had any, oh, sorry, I just lost this question there, sorry. There's so many arriving, it jumped off my screen. I was just wondering if you had any tips for helping with that when I begin to feel overwhelmed in specific situations.
Lots. It's really hard to think of something like small and nugget sized at the moment. So I think with social anxiety, again, it's tuning into that inner critic, because that's often quite loud with social anxiety, and really looking at that evidence. Is this really true and factually correct, or is there another way of thinking about this? The other part of kind of shifting our mindset that we haven't talked so much about today is that shifting our behavior bit. We learn often by doing. If we do something differently, we learn something, and so therefore we can update our way of thinking. So if we go back to that situation, walking into a room and thinking nobody likes me, well, if you go into a room enough times and put yourself in that situation enough times, you might get a wider range of responses than that one experience. So as well as challenging that thought by weighing up the evidence, you're also exposing yourself to the same situation to gain more varied outcomes that then give you that evidence to back up, hey, maybe that's not completely true. So it's about kind of looking at the way you're thinking and the way you're behaving, which I recognize is probably a slightly longer answer than you.
No, but I really appreciate that point. And actually, one of the things I'm really worried about for our collective community, it's especially since COVID, is that I feel some of us have got into a little bit of social apathy and almost less likely to get involved in social situations than we might have done. And what I've really enjoyed when we've run some of our local activities, I run a local group near me and people come to it, and what's been said to me a few times is like, I have a bit of social anxiety and I was really nervous about going tonight, and I'm so glad I did, because I actually found myself feeling much more welcomed, and it was much less overwhelming than I had my brain had told myself it was going to be. So I think that point you're making about take the courage to just take a first step and see how it goes, I think there's some real wisdom there. Thank you. Let's come on to Joe's question, because I know this is a really popular one. Do you have any tips for managing overthinking?
Oh, overthinking is the worst. Yes. So overthinking.
What do you mean by overthinking, just so we can make sure we understand the same thing? What does that mean, do you think?
So, well, overthinking from a CBT therapist lens is where we get stuck in these patterns where almost we can't let go of a thought. So it might be, I don't know, ahead of a situation. Overthinking is, we can either overthink the future, which is kind of worrying interchangeably, where we're preempting things that could happen. And so we think about it, we almost think about it until we can't think about it anymore. We're trying to kind of plan and prepare and preempt and look after ourselves from all these bad things that we think could happen. We can also overthink the past, which we also refer to as ruminating, which is where we're replaying and regurgitating things that have already happened. And what we know is we can't change the past and we can't control the future. So overthinking kind of keeps us in this mental place where we're just brooding over the same things over and over and over again in a way that often leaves us feeling like we can't control it. It's just happening. And it can bring our mood down if we're focusing on the past, and it can cause anxiety if we're focusing on the future.
It sounds a bit like it's overthinking is a kind of, you're getting stuck in an unhelpful thought loop. So back to Joe's question, what can we do when that happens?
So again, I think it comes back to noticing when we're doing that. Again, there isn't a quick fix, unfortunately. Within CBT, we have a series of exercises that we bring in over the course of 2 or 3 sessions to help notice, challenge, and kind of break that pattern. So it starts with noticing when we're doing it, seeing if we can kind of look at, well, gently kind of challenge, how helpful is this for me right now? Is there another way of thinking about this that is maybe more helpful? But also learning how to break those cycles. It's probably a little bit more complex than we can go into in a short amount of time. But one of the things we might look at with overthinking the future with anxiety is what we refer to as worry postponement. So this overthinking that I'm caught in right now, can I notice it? Can I try and make a conscious thought to stop it now and just postpone it for a little bit? Can I try and pause it and maybe come back to it so that we can see if we can just stave it off a little bit, and then a little bit longer and a little bit longer?
I love that idea, because I've heard people talking about like setting aside a worry time. So when it comes up, you think, look, I've got a time at 6 p.m. tonight when I'm home with my cup of tea, I'll have some worrying time. But right now I'm going to just get on with things. So I like that. But Steve's also asked a related question. I'm going to jump ahead here slightly. But he said, if overthinking is your issue, is actually thought challenging a good strategy? Because of course that's going to create more thinking. And I think there's perhaps an interesting insight there. And it reminds me that one of the things I find most helpful when I'm stuck in a loop is something that is more like a scene change, so like getting outdoors, getting physically active, doing something, that gets me into my body and out of my head, for example. Do you think those strategies work as well?
Yeah, I think that's such a good point. Absolutely. Thought challenging, I suppose there are different ways of thought challenging. So thought challenging might be recognizing that we're thinking in a certain way and asking ourselves, is this helpful? Is there any kind of basis behind this? Have I gone through something similar before? So a short few questions rather than feeding the overthinking. So absolutely, that's such a good question, such a good point. I suppose, going to your point, Mark, absolutely giving ourselves something else to focus on can be really helpful. What we want to be mindful of is that we're not looking for distraction, because that can send us the message, I can't cope with this. I need to be able to busy myself or do something else. So what I'd recommend instead is trying to bring our attention back to whatever we're doing at that time. So if you're watching a film and then these thoughts creep in and you've noticed that overthinking, can you try and bring your attention back to the film or the conversation you're having or the email you're writing? And absolutely, going out for a walk is a great thing to do. I think it's just looking at the intention behind it. If you're doing that with an active sense of this is going to be really helpful for me, then absolutely do it. But if it feels more like a, I just can't cope with this, I need to throw something else at my brain to take away from this, although it might feel more comfortable in the short term, long term it can feed that message that we
You
can't
haven't
cope
really
with it.
addressed the underlying challenge, have you? And I think that's a really important reminder that sort of pushing our difficult thoughts and feelings away isn't often the solution in terms of actually resolving it. Thank you. That's really wise, Meera. So Kerry's asked a good question that sort of builds on that thought challenging to the next point you mentioned before about sort of problem solving. She says, what do you do when you've weighed up the evidence against a thought, particularly when it's a worry, but you still feel like it's just true and you can't let the thought go? I guess that's where some of your problem solving strategies come in. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we can't thought challenge a worry necessarily, being a little bit finicky here, because worries are normally future based and haven't happened yet. So we can get stuck in these cycles, absolutely, but we're almost trying to do something we can't do, because if it's in the future, well, we don't know if it is going to happen. So trying to challenge that is really tricky. But if we are challenging a thought, a kind of a statement, and finding actually there isn't a lot of evidence, or there is a lot of evidence that backs it, or there isn't a lot of evidence that backs up a more helpful way of thinking, then yeah, we need to problem solve that. We need to acknowledge, okay, well, maybe this is true and accurate. So what can we do to try and make a shift here?
Thank you. Let's come on to a question which links back to what I was saying about how we bring this into our relationships with others. Becky's asked a really difficult question, I think, and but you know, really heartfelt. Becky says, any ideas how I can help my mum? My dad passed away 8 months ago and she seems to be losing the will. She isn't eating properly and sleeps a lot. She's heartbroken. Well, Becky, first of all, our hearts go out to you and your family and for the loss of your dad. That's I guess an example of a really genuinely difficult situation where it's really understandable you'd have difficult thoughts and feelings, Meera. What kind of advice could you give someone in Becky's situation?
It's a really sad situation. Grief is really difficult and it affects us all in really different ways. There are grief cycles and things that help explain it, but our experiences will all vary. And I think it comes back to that normalizing, or you would be heartbroken in that situation. It's a really sad situation to be in. So we're not going to try and necessarily think our way out of that. Grief is a really normal response, and sometimes we need that time and space to work through it and focus on, well, what support is available. So thinking about that active listening, almost that sense of, well, yeah, of course you feel that way, let's be here with you for this. And if your mum or if others in similar situations do want some support or could benefit from that, from some support, thinking about what that might look like. There are things like, there's grief counselling, for example, that might be a really helpful space to try and make sense of some of those thoughts and really difficult emotions. But I think, again, it's around normalizing that we are humans with emotions that can feel really upsetting, and sometimes they're really proportionate and normal emotions.
We are getting towards the end of our time together, Meera, and I want to leave time for a final kind of interactive activity with this amazing community that have come together. And thank you again, everyone, for all of the contributions in the chat and all these fantastic questions. Jen has used a word that I hear quite often, and I find I struggle to say, catastrophizing. But she says, I often jump to worst case scenarios in situations. Have you got any tips on how to not catastrophize, assuming I've said that correctly?
Yes, catastrophizing. I suppose with catastrophizing, it's where we're jumping to the absolute worst case scenario. So we can also refer to it sometimes as all or nothing thinking or black and white thinking. And what we want to do is kind of find a happy medium. So if that is the absolute worst case that our mind is taking us to, well, what's the best case scenario? And then somewhere between that best case and worst case, what's the most likely case?
Thank you. I think we've got time for one more before we do a final wrap up. Someone, she's just put their initials HP, has asked a really important question and been really honest and open. I have anxiety and OCD and I've had for many years, and I've had CBT sessions. Do you have any idea why I'm still feeling sort of empty every day? I'll leave you in a moment to answer that properly, Meera, but I guess one thing we haven't talked about is, of course, there's a whole range of different types of therapeutic support and wider support available for people with different challenges. And I guess CBT can be enormously helpful for many people, but isn't necessarily the right answer for everyone. And certainly I know people who have found it incredibly life-changing, and others who found it hasn't really worked for them. And I think it's probably worth acknowledging that we are different in our needs and our responses, really. But what do you think in an example of someone who's clearly really trying to address an underlying challenge, but not necessarily found the right path for them yet?
I think again, it's a really difficult situation where you're trying really hard and seemingly doing all the right things, but maybe not getting where you want to be. So there are a number of things that could be happening. CBT is a really active form of therapy, so there is a level of kind of being ready for it, being able to really fully commit to the process. And being in a position in your life where you can commit to that. If you've got lots of difficult things happening in your life, it's a really tough thing to try and make those changes. So there's an element about the timing, the readiness, the ability to really commit to this as well. There's also whether it is the right approach. There are different therapy modalities. Now, CBT it's the recommended therapy and treatment for most common mental health problems. But there are other forms of therapy, and we are all individuals. We do think and respond in slightly different ways. So it might be worth looking into other approaches. And also, it might be that the therapist isn't right. Again, we're all people. We don't always gel and connect with people the way we might like to. So there are lots of different factors that influence how well CBT is going to work. Sometimes there can be that self-critical voice can tell us, well, it's I'm not doing it right, or it's not working for me. But again, I think that there can be a number of things at play. So exploring some of those things, I think also in good therapy, having that open conversation is absolutely key to be able to say, actually, I'm not quite where I want to be. What's going on there? Because that should ideally be something that is picked up on so that you are getting the right level of support.
Well said. And as I said before, we're going to send around some resources in our follow-up tomorrow, as well as a link to the video from this conversation, so you can watch it again and you can share it with others. But what I'd like to suggest we do now, and taking a leaf out of Meera's suggestion of mindfulness, I'm going to suggest we just take a pause. Whatever you're doing right now, thank you for still being here. It's been amazing to see the number of participants staying consistent throughout this event. So just take a moment to take a pause and a breath and just notice how you're feeling right now, and just take a moment to be here now with whatever's going on for you and whatever feelings and thoughts are going on. Now, we've heard a huge amount from Meera as part of this event. We've heard from each other in the chat. We've had our own thoughts. We've shared what we're grateful for. We've shared what we're feeling. Now I'd like you to bring your attention to something that has grabbed you as part of this conversation that you'd like to take forward in some way. It could be just finding out more about CBT as a process. It might be some of Meera's ideas about seeing the thought behind the feeling. It might be then perhaps challenging thoughts and difficult thoughts and saying, well, is there the evidence for that? It might be then saying, well, actually, can I problem solve even if I can't change the situation? And of course, it might be these other things around, cultivating a sense of, gratitude and self-compassion. So whatever it might be for you, let's just take a moment to bring it to mind. And if you'd like to share a couple of words in the chat about something that you might do differently, something that's going to stay with you, something that's inspired you from this conversation, I'd love to see it in the chat. And Meera, I'll just read a few of these out. Trying to find evidence for negative thoughts, look into problem-solving techniques, try and find out more about CBT, log something positive each day. I want to be a better listener. I'm going to use ABC. I'm going to listen better. I'm going to stop catastrophizing. I'm going to worry less about the future. I'm I'm going to slow down, reduce black and white thinking, notice my thoughts and emotions. Wonderful. What great outcomes. And that's just a fraction of the things that are spinning past on my screen. I hope you're feeling encouraged to hear that, Meera. What does that sound like to you?
It's great. I'm really enjoying, just as you've been speaking, just watching the comments popping up. It's lovely to see all these takeaway points. And I think, you know, as with Action for Happiness, CBT is a really active therapy. So I think the key here is to take that little nugget, see if you can put it into practice, notice how you feel as a result of doing that. And hopefully then that becomes your motivator to keep doing that.
I find that I have sort of challenging thoughts and feelings when I come into these events. I've been doing these for a long time, but obviously it's always a little bit nervous about the technology and what the arc of the conversation and who shows up and so on. And I just find that seeing all of these lovely comments from you in the community really shifts my mindset back to the theme of today's event. And it's really interesting how just a little change in an interaction can have that shift in how you feel. But I'm also reminded that actually something that we maybe haven't talked enough about is togetherness, and actually being part of a community, being in connection with other people is also a really supportive thing. Of course, that's what you're doing as a therapist in a one-to-one basis. But I think what we're trying to do here as a little Action for Happiness family is supporting each other. So thank you to everyone who's been part of this event. Meera, we're sort of out of time, but I'd love to allow you to have the final word, really. We're going to share links to your website and resources tomorrow, but if you had to leave us with one sort of main thought or idea, what would you like to share that we can take away as a final idea?
Oh, it's a tough question. I'll try and keep it really short. I think one question, short and sweet, when you notice yourself, when you notice a kind of shift in emotions that you don't necessarily want to be feeling, see if you can notice the thought attached to it. And then a question for you: is this way of thinking helpful for me right now? And if it's not helpful, there's a cheeky second question: what would be a more helpful way of thinking about this?
That's so simple and yet really, really profound. So let me just try and make sure I heard you correctly, doing your active listening tip. So notice, ask, is this a helpful way of thinking? And if not, what might be a more helpful way? Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, Meera. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. You've shared so much wisdom, and I'm really grateful to you sparing the time, and to everyone who's been part of this event. And do join us again for another live Action for Happiness event very soon. And thank you to everyone who helps make this community so special. Thanks, Meera. See you again soon. Keep up the great work.
Thanks. Bye.